all here, early in the morning, especially for Portuguese standards. Actually, yes, I'm sorry, yes, I realized that my dress code was rather inappropriate. As I said, I did go initially, I did check the weather. And then yesterday, so I ended up wrapping up in the blankets and things like this. Actually reminds me, I had this trip to Singapore and Japan just last November, because I worked quite a lot in Singapore and Japan. And about the dress code, right? I was supposed to have this training in Singapore on resilience, resilience training for trainers and HR in different organizations in Singapore. So basically it was a training around how to become a resilience trainer for the workplace. So very high executive level audience. I had about 50 people in this very high working professional audience. I was supposed to start the training at 9 o'clock in the morning, and I took this risk to fly in a bit late at night. So my plane landed at 1 o'clock in the morning. I thought, okay, never mind, I'll sleep 6 hours, it's okay, I will be fine. And so I fly in at 1 o'clock in the morning, I come out of the airport to pick up my luggage, and oops, for some reason I see my name written, Ilona Boniwell, please contact whatever information. And it just happened that my bag was forgotten in Dubai. But this is all about dress code. And this moment, so it's 1 o'clock in the morning, all shops are closed, and I'm supposed to teach at 9 o'clock in the morning, this executive audience, 50 students, and I just looked at myself, and I was wearing kind of like white tracksuit bottoms, more or less, some sort of fluffy, strange trousers. You know, you wear nice trousers when you're on the plane for 12 hours. Pink shoes, because they were nice and comfortable as well. And a completely, it's not the end of the story, some sort of long sleeve top which went with it. And underneath it was a little top, like this little sleeve, which completely didn't go with the whole thing. Like, I think it was, whatever, not green, but something like that. Like, completely didn't go. But I wasn't in Singapore before, I was in Paris, and it was November, so the long sleeve top went fine. It was like dark blue, white, and pink kind of worked. Only in Singapore it was 40 degrees, so the long sleeve top didn't work. So anyway, and so I find myself at 9 o'clock in the morning, standing in front of executive people with the green, white tracksuit bottom and pink shoes, because there is really no solution. And so I had to find a solution. So I asked them, does anybody think there's anything wrong with my dress code? and so I explained, so as we're here on the training course on resilience, this is going to be an example of resilience. I'm going to model it. Anyway, so after that went rather well. So my bag arrived by the end of the day. So anyway, it was about the dress code. Here, hopefully, it's a bit more appropriate anyway. So what we're going to talk about today is actually going to talk about positive psychology and more practical applications of it, or at least we'll start talking about it, and we'll continue doing more practical stuff during the afternoon. So you will feel jealous to the people staying in the afternoon, but hopefully that will persuade you to take the EMAPP program in case you haven't yet. So this is the academic credential part, which my host asked me to mention. So I'm a positive psychologist from 1999. I started actually working in the field of positive psychology very early on. I was just very, very lucky to encounter it virtually 1 year after positive psychology got started. And I was very lucky because I actually was a student at the time. And basically I was about to organize a annual student British Psychological Society-wide conference for British students, because I always organize something, so you probably noticed. And the person on my committee was Alex Linley. I don't know if you ever heard about Alex Linley. So we were both students at the time, undergraduate students on this student committee of the British Psychological Society, and I said, guys, what do you think we should organize this annual student conference about? I was a conference officer, he was the chair. And he said, why not positive psychology? I said, what's positive psychology? And so this is how I got involved in positive psychology, organizing the student conference in 2000. Started in 1999, the conference was in 2000. And actually when in 2001, Martin Seligman visited Britain to give a keynote for the whole British Psychological Society centenary conference. Nobody knew quite what to do with him because there was no positive psychology in Britain. And then somebody remembered that there was this girl who organized a student conference on positive psychology. So I ended up with Martin Seligman dropping in for the whole day of a student conference and sitting in a corner. And you know, this was pre-internet, Google, LinkedIn, you know, everybody by photo days. So, and I was wondering what is, at that time, I was young, what is old guy doing here at the student conference? It's kind of, is he a mature student? He's a bit too mature for to be a student. So, and at the end of this day, this mature guy came to me and said, hello, I'm Martin Seligman. Would you like to have a coffee with me? That was the beginning of my active involvement in positive psychology. So, luckily I didn't ask him whether he was a mature student. Anyway, so I was quite lucky to get engaged in this field relatively early on, and really, in a sense, work all my professional life in this field. So yes, I do a lot of speaking nowadays. I have founded many years ago the European Network of Positive Psychology, actually thanks to this meeting with Martin Seligman in 2001. He asked me, so how should we bring positive psychology to Europe? I said, okay, let's create a European network. That was the beginning of it. I was at some point the first vice chair of the International Positive Psychology Association. Nowadays, one of my hats, and I have several hats, I run basically a consultancy called Positron, which is about taking positive psychology and creating practical, workable solutions for either other educational institutions, non-for-profit sector or for-profit sector. And in terms of the academic part, I run for many years the University of East London Master's Program in Positive Psychology. Nowadays, I created the new Master's Program in Positive Psychology. That's one of the new babies, which is called IMAPP, the International Masters in Positive Psychology, which is the first program in Europe and I think in the world allowing people differentiation between their pathways. So it's 15 different modules for students, out of which they only need to choose 6. They're all intensive modules, and if basically you are a positive psychology, if you are working in education, you can specialize in positive psychology for education. If you are working in coaching, you can specialize in coaching and training. If you are in HR, for example, you can specialize in positive psychology for organizations, you can specialize in positive psychology for society, etc. So it's basically a program that allows, through very intensive training, the differentiation between professional pathways. It's running in Cambridge and in Paris, as from next week. This is starting next week. So it's the first intake. Then in Paris, I teach in ISCSP, which is a business school. And I teach in the Hall, which is a school for engineers, but I teach in both of them positive leadership, positive management. And my latest hat, but not on the slides yet, I recently become a scientific director of, part-time scientific director, of a children's charity that is actually working to transform the world of education in France. It's one of my hats for many years. I worked a lot with education in terms of creating programs around well-being and resilience and teaching teachers how to teach them to kids. So I have this big passion about how to bring positive education into the world of schools. And I don't know what's happening in Portugal, but in England in generally, the whole world of social emotional skills, basically developing social emotional literacy in school, is quite developed. There are many different programs. There's lots of research evaluation going on. More and more schools are now engaging in different resilience programs for kids, etc. But I don't know about Portugal at all. I would love to know. But in France, when I came to France, because of meeting the French guy, 4 years ago, I discovered that there was nothing. Nothing. There were just only academic subjects and nothing else. actually no teaching at all about any social emotional competences. Forget well-being and resilience. Forget collaboration skills. Nothing. Like, just stunningly nothing. So it's a very nice challenge because there is a lot to do, like really quite a lot to do to transform the French educational system in terms of bringing this psychological, socio-psychological, I would say, element into the curriculum. But that's a big challenge because the system is quite established. So now in this charity that actually has gone quite a long way to try to challenge this situation, and is already training teachers in some of the departments on bringing these skills into school. Okay, that was actually quite a long introduction. I write some books, and as I mentioned already, I practice positive education on my kids sometimes. Sometimes they practice it on me. Sometimes it's not only positive education that they practice, but never mind. So I used to have 2 kids, as I was explaining, and then through marrying somebody with another 2 kids and making another one, we kind of ended up with 5. So I transferred from being a normal mom, kind of with 2 kids, normal busy mom, you know, traveling around all over the place, never seeing my kids and feeling guilty enough as it was, to suddenly having 5 of them. So the little one is 3 now, 3 and a half, and the big ones are 15, 16, 17, and 18. Conveniently enough. Anyway, so that's now you know everything about it. Okay. Any questions, feel free to ask. By the way, we are going to concentrate on coaching, but if you would like to go further into anything else, we can go into something else as well. So if you would like to ask any questions around education, around psychology applications to business, or even to wonderful projects like Portugal, which I haven't mentioned, like, for example, how to change public policy, we can talk about it later. But never mind, for the time being, I would like to start with coaching, which is the title for today. And so the idea is we're going to talk a little bit about coaching and distinguishing it from other interventions, understanding basic coaching contributions to organizations and individuals, review a couple of models, medical, positive psychology type of models, establish relationship specifically between coaching and positive psychology, and maybe just try a couple of coaching exercises. So, before we start, how many of you are here? How many of you would identify with the profession of coaching? In the sense, how many of you are coaches? Excellent. Okay. How many of you would like to be coaches? Okay. You can, by the way, raise your hand twice. That's fine. You say I'm a psychologist, but I also would like to be a psychologist, so that works. Okay. How many of you are on the EMAPP program right now? Okay. How many of you were on the EMAPP program before?
He raised his hand twice.
Okay. Interesting. Okay. So you were before and you are now. Yes, exactly. The next session will be in the future.
Hopefully you'll keep on.
Okay. That gives me a bit of an indication. So, okay. And how many, because I have this funny feeling that I've seen a few of you before already. How many of you have seen this talk before? Thank you. Okay, yes.
Maybe on the YouTube?
Sorry?
Maybe on the YouTube?
YouTube, yes, right.
Maybe me on YouTube.
No.
And I don't think I have the YouTube one on coaching, do I? No, I don't think so. Sorry, no, the TEDx talk is more on education. I think the YouTube things are more education type of things.
We have one from positive psychology and coaching and how they associate with each other.
Okay, it's on YouTube? Okay, I don't know, maybe. Okay, so in terms of if you were here before, there will be a couple of new things, but only a couple of new things because it's the same kind of type of talk. And okay, maybe I will tell different stories, maybe, but you'll have to take into account that if you've seen it, it was kind of going around the same lines. Well, anyway, so let's make a start. That gives me a little bit of idea. So I would just like to start with some definitions of coaching, quite basic ones. This is probably quite encompassing one. The art of facilitating the performance, learning and development of another. Okay. Then they can go one step further and try to sort of differentiate between the life, sort of general life coaching and more specifically executive coaching. what is more specific about executive coaching is usually it's a relationship, helping a relationship form between a client, who usually have some sort of managerial authority in an organization, and a consultant who uses a wide variety of behavioral, psychological, etc. techniques and methods to help the client to achieve some sort of mutually identified set of objectives to improve the client's professional performance. The important part, of course, in the executive coaching is this triadic relationship, because there is never a relationship just directly between the client and the coach, but there is also the relationship between the client, the coach, and somebody else who is paying for this coach. Usually, some sort of representative of the organization, so it may be HR that's subcontracting the coach, it may be the manager directly, it may be other subsystems of the wider organization that's actually subcontracting the coach. So of course this relationship between the coach and the coachee is very much affected by this third party, because sometimes it is actually not clear who is setting the agenda, and whether the coach is setting the agenda, whether the client is setting the agenda for themselves, or whether it's actually the manager that is setting the agenda for the coach. And very often it is the case. And here what is important, of course, is the whole explicit agreement and the explicit contract already, first of all, between the coach and the organization, because very often coaches who are quite experienced in that put very strict boundaries, saying, I understand your requirements, but nevertheless my contract will be with my coachee primary. It's a primary contract. And then I may not be able to communicate the information from this contract to yourself. So that may be one positioning. Another positioning, maybe the manager or HR asking, I need you to get this client to understand certain rules of behavior, learn certain skills, etc. And here the question, of course, about the assertiveness of the coach and the positioning of the coach, because obviously if the coach is just following the manager's agenda without the explicit permission of client, that can be quite tricky. Well, moving on a little bit, of course we have another, very often when we look at the coaching conferences, for example, when we look at what's happening in the coaching world, there is another very specific sub-profession in coaching. It's called coaching psychology. I mean, actually being put simply, coaching psychology is simply coaching applied by people who usually have psychological training. So people who would usually have psychological degree, either it's an undergraduate degree or it's a postgraduate degree, but somebody who actually is a psychologist at the base and then have learned, or during their psychological training have learned coaching methods to apply to clients. So basically, again, this is coming much more from a systematic understanding of psychological science, and the interventions are grounded in this greater, I would say, understanding of human behavior. So, the purposes of coaching we can define as there are multiple again, and they're changing, because coaching, I think, is quite an evolving profession, but it's generally to find solutions to problems or difficult situations, to help clients to set objectives or goals, to support the client towards these goals with encouragement, assistance and guidance, to give some feedback on the client's behavior, or to enable a client to manage a given task, etc., in order to produce some sort of outstanding performance. So, simply put, what is coaching? The coaching is conversation about learning, about change, and more about asking the right questions than providing the right answers. So when we are learning coaching, when we are getting into this process of coaching, in fact, what we are doing most of the time is actually we are learning to ask good questions. It's much, much more about positioning the questions and dipping into this world through questions. And the idea of coaching very often is to get the client to find their own solutions to an existing problem. Okay, this is just coming from the British perspective, a brief history of the evolution of coaching in Britain, and the interesting move towards professionalization of this discipline. So coaching started, I would say, in the late 90s, 1980s, early 1990s. First of all, with the appearance of executive coaching, some sort of helpful working relationships, one-to-one relationships, in order to get to this performance outcomes. Mid to late 1990s, what we saw in Britain, it was virtually an explosion in coaching training. Coaching training just mushroomed everywhere. Everybody was training you as a coach. With very, 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 very mixed results. because I've seen some of the coaching courses at the time, and they were absolutely, some of them were sometimes really quite ridiculous in terms of taking very simplistic understanding of a human being and basically teaching coaches how to teach a client more or less to use positive affirmations and things like this. So it was a mixed bag. By the way, does everybody know the sort of famous research on positive affirmations and how positive affirmations work? No? What is the impact of positive affirmations on self-esteem? There's a really nice study, which you know positive affirmations. The idea is you stand in front of the mirror, you say to yourself, I'm beautiful, or okay, maybe in a more complex way, etc. And you repeat it, and you look at yourself, and you try to be with what you're saying. It's actually not quite as bad. It can work. So what is the impact, basically, of positive affirmations and self-esteem? Okay, one study investigates specifically. And what is interesting, what they found out, is that if you have high self-esteem, the impact is very positive. So if you have high self-esteem, positive affirmations work. So if you try to convince yourself you are beautiful, you are intelligent, you are successful, you will believe yourself. And you actually, self-esteem scores improve as a result of continuous positive affirmation. However, if you have a low self-esteem, then your self-esteem actually drops as a result of positive affirmation. So basically keep repeating to yourself, you are beautiful, you are beautiful, you are beautiful, and at some point you say, who am I kidding? and it actually has a negative impact. And so this is okay, I'm not saying it was all like this, but this can be the impact of this limited understanding, scientific understanding, and bringing this very limited scientific understanding into some practice, because sometimes they actually can end up with opposite results to what we were hoping to achieve. Since about early 2000, there was a lot of move in Britain, at least, towards sort of professionalism within the coaching profession, with several master's programs established. The first one was Oxford Brookes University, and I was actually quite fortunate before the University of East London to work on the team of the coaching masters for 1 year, actually teaching on this program. But there are many other programs nowadays: East London Style, Sheffer, McDonough Institute, Middlesex, etc. So many programs, and this really brought coaching to a different level, because little by little it really became quite clear that most coaches would have had some long-lasting coaching training, either a master's degree of some type or a related master's program, or some sort of quite a long process training ranging between 12 months to 24 months, and very often nowadays accredited by several coaching bodies as well. And so nowadays about more than 20,000, I think probably the number is even higher now, of coaches in private and public sector, in many different organizations providing guidelines. We have the coaching psychology section of British Psychological Society, which is actually quite a powerful force, especially for coaching psychologists, European Mentoring Coaching Council, Association for Coaching, International Coach Federation, etc. So the profession is much better managed, much better approved, and I would say at a much higher professional level. It was actually interesting to observe this transformation, because it happened in my lifetime. For example, I can look back and remember it was completely different. Now it has changed. So it's really, it grew, and at some point coaching was very much associated with something a bit shameful. Yes, you are a coach. Everybody's a life coach. Of course. Whilst now, the attitude towards the profession has changed. Oh, you're a coach. Okay, tell me with which, where did you train, and what particular coach you adopt, etc. So it's the respect towards the coaching profession has increased as well, I think, as a result of this professionalization and move towards this accreditation. So that's kind of the quick evolution. I would like to know what's happening in Portugal. Do you have a similar sort of tendency? In master's programs yet or not yet? Not yet, but approval of the, sorry? Okay, few, okay. approval of the coaching bodies, etc. Right?
Yes.
Wrong?
It's growing immensely also in Portugal.
Yes, the coaching appears 15 years ago in Portugal,
Okay.
maybe 10, 15 years ago, maybe even more.
Mm-hmm.
It has a great impact on Portuguese society.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody was, as you said, life coach, doing coaching trainings,
Yeah.
coaching sessions. And now, due to the exponential growth, the market is managing the good ones.
Okay. Yes. Yes. So
And I agree with you that we had several years ago training sessions from coaching sessions that was some kind of weird sessions. Something that, how's that possible?
yes.
Yeah, not scientifically based. And I think the things that people, more on executive coaching,
Mm-hmm.
they are seeing that as a need, not a wish.
Yes.
It's getting more due to the resilience that people need to have in organizations and teams.
Mm-hmm.
Asking for a coach is more a need than the wish.
Okay. Absolutely. Yes. Yes. It is much more need-based because organizations are actually really seeing the return on investment. Yeah. Okay.
Can I ask something?
Yes.
Why would you say that there was this immense growth of interest in this particular type of approach?
In my opinion, I think that was the first, and I think that's also partly behind the interest in positive psychology. I think coaching is a very interesting niche in terms of many people, we all choose a profession at the age of 18, very often not thinking very much about it. Gets to the age of approximately 40, the midlife crisis, and realize that maybe there was something better to do with our lives, with all this now experience, etc. So there is, I think, a lot of interest in some sort of applied psychological interventions in general. And coaching was probably the first profession to offer this way of applying psychology without actually becoming a psychologist, avoiding the whole, depending on the country, between 5 and 7 years training, in sense. But being able to actually apply psychology in a daily life, combining it with existing professional experiences.
So the question is in a positive way.
Mm-hmm.
You can achieve better results. You will be more creative, you
Exactly.
will be more friendly, open.
Exactly. Yes, that's again very good point. It's also addressing, and we're talking about individual coaching or group coaching, it is also addressing this old model of delivering teaching and old model of delivering training. Yes. That is much more interactive and open-minded. And of course, many approaches are coming together now because coaching is becoming this very, very big umbrella term that we are going to work in a minute. Well, what is this umbrella term? And it opens new opportunities for exploration. Thank you. Yes. Thank you. You see, we can answer questions together. It's called collective intelligence. So, okay, these are some of them. Are many, many different models of coaching. This is not for coaches. This is for people who are not that familiar with coaching. In terms of, for example, a very classic one is GROW model, how to set a goal and follow the position of the goal. There's, for example, very common model talking about first assessment of the client and assessment of what's happening, opportunities, challenges, potential impact of changes, goal setting, and then implementation of the solutions chosen, and evaluation and fine-tuning. That's one way, which is, for example, we start with authentic listening, then rebalancing the existing issues of the client, then generating new ideas and new solutions for the future, and again supporting the client in the process, etc. There are many, many, many different models outlining the process. The process is not about the models so far, it's actually about learning them, applying them, and seeing what works for you and actually what is working in this relationship. Then that's the second subcategory, bigger subcategory, another bigger subcategory when we talk about coaching or specifically about one-to-one helping interventions is mentoring. What is mentoring? What is the definition of mentoring, and how does mentoring differ from coaching? And so what mentoring is actually usually a relationship with either influential person who helps you achieve your ideas of career goals, it's more or less the old definition of mentoring, I would say, or very often also just working with somebody in your specific line of discipline or work, so somebody who is actually competent in your specific profession, but usually somebody who is of a senior level, who is able to not just ask you questions as a coach, but in addition to asking questions, actually who is able to provide some of the answers. So if coaching is more about asking questions, then mentoring is about, of course, conversation-bounded learning and about the changing long term, but it's also not only about asking questions, but also about providing the right answers. In a sense, answers coming from the experience of somebody who is competent in this particular type of role. So, which is why, for example, we have the entrepreneurs, successful entrepreneurs mentoring the young entrepreneurs because they know how it works. And of course, maybe all of the answers would not be perfect, but they have gone through the same hurdles, they have faced the same challenges, and they also have some experience to share. It's not just about saying, and how can we find a solution to this problem, but you know what, 20 years ago I did this. I don't know about the legislation right now, but maybe you should look in this direction. So, what if, for example, now we can talk about also what's the difference between coaching, mentoring, and counseling. So if mentoring is long-term, future-focused, and dealing very often with career growth, coaching, we can say, is present and future. It can be long-term, but usually it's less long-term. So it's quite often, it's quite intense, an intensive intervention that may just last 6 weeks, or 4 weeks, or 2 months, or 3 months. It can be long-term, of course, but it is less frequently long-term. It focuses much more on the present moment, what's happening right now, future, of course, and on skills behavior. And then, of course, there is counseling and psychotherapy, and counseling and psychotherapy in different cultures, in different situations, I found that defined very differently. And sometimes we can then even reverse some of the definitions. But counseling in general is dealing with psychological disturbance of some type, while psychotherapy is usually dealing with more serious issues and more, what we can say, more serious psychological disturbance than counseling. And both counseling and psychotherapy, and one of the differences between coaching and mentoring, they're really very much focused on the past, the present, and the future. Sometimes, I would say, coaches contrast themselves with psychotherapy, saying psychotherapy deals with past issues, while the coaching actually deals with the future issues. I don't completely agree with it. I think in the long-term psychotherapeutic process or counseling process, both the past and the future issues are addressed. But it is the case, most of the time, that the coaching does not necessarily look at the past issues, because coaches very often don't necessarily have the skills to actually go into this. And sorry?
To actually go deeper.
Exactly, to actually go deeper, which can be, again, one of the disadvantages. And again, what is very important is acknowledging these boundaries and understanding there are boundaries. So unless you are trained in psychotherapy or counseling, if you are a coach, do not go there. Because there may be some elephants coming out of the cupboard that you are not prepared for. And in fact, it can be quite dangerous to look at the past issues without having the necessary psychological training. So of course, what raises the issues for coaches is usually having this very high awareness. And lots of coaching training is concentrated on that a lot. Is finding this very high awareness of your boundaries and of your capacities, and also having some referral mechanisms. If you are a coach, so actually so knowing where to send the clients if certain issues are coming up that are outside of your scope of competence, saying, okay, here I cannot continue, or if you want us to continue, I think some of these issues you probably need additional help with, so we can continue in collaboration. Of course, if you are working as a counselor or psychotherapist, we can probably continue working just on the coaching matters, or maybe perhaps you might need to consider what to address first. So, and again, there are many models nowadays trying to define different disciplines and understand the differences between these different one-to-one approaches to flourishing. So where would you put the coaching, where would you put the mentoring? For example, all of them, of course, are looking to concentrate towards the development of the individual, but some of them are focusing more on improving the performance, and some of them focus more on eliminating psychological disturbance of some type. And now there is going to be a little task. Okay. this task, because otherwise you get bored listening. Okay, this little task is going to involve you getting into little groups, quite small. You cannot get big groups because they're way. So I link you to get into small groups of 3 to 4 people and have a little conversation about all of this different one-to-one and also group, if you want to include them, group helping by talking professions. So we have mentoring, consulting, coaching, training, counseling, psychotherapy. We also have clinical psychology. We have psychiatry. What else do we have? What other professions helping by talking professions exist? Is there anything I'm missing from this list? You can have child psychology, okay, education if you want, yeah. We have training already. Is there anything else? No? Development, okay. We have all the psychology as well, adding, yeah, different type of psychology. Is there anything else we are missing?
Risks.
Sorry?
Risks.
That's good. That is good actually. I never had this one. On the list.
It's much like a coach.
Yes, very interesting. Yes, not bad. Thank you. Okay. Okay, another thing. So if you want to add something, so basically these are helping by talking professions, mainly applicable to one-to-one, but also sometimes because even training can be done one-to-one. You can train somebody one-to-one. You can consult a client. You have a client, specific client who is working on the organization of their company, and this is your client. You're actually working with him one-to-one, for example. Okay, but the other things that can be at the group level. So you have a little task. The task is to take this helping by talking professions and try to construct the model. So it will involve something. Try to construct the model, actually locating them in a direction, in relation to each other in a way that is meaningful. Okay, in a sense, if you look back here, this was a model. This was a model. Okay, it's the model of actually locating this helping by talking professions in relation to each other in a meaningful way. So you can think about some axes, for example. So some axes can be medical versus positive. They can be axis organizational versus private. It can be. You can think of different axes. They're actually maybe different. So you can take axes. You can think in 3D shapes if you would like. You can sort of, I don't know. At one point, somebody presented to me a perfect model of a flower with petals. That can be a way. So think basically of a creative way to construct a model that represents the relationships between these helping by talking professions in a way that is meaningful, in a way that you can communicate. Okay? Make sense? You have 20 minutes. Psychology and coaching. And I don't quite know why I jumped away, but never mind.
Sorry, since this is not Japan, can I just ask you 2 minutes just to present another teacher that will be here? She needs to leave.
Okay, yes please.
Sorry, it's 1 minute. Eu sou para apresentar a Sara Ascenso, que vai estar aqui no dia Ciência das Artes e Humanidades, é professora no King's College, é psicóloga de formação, mas trabalha com música. Royal College of Music. E vamos fazer uma aula aberta com música. E ela tem um trabalho extraordinário, studying the relationship between positive psychology and music. So it's a fascinating human being again. We always bring beautiful human beings and fascinating ones. So keep with attention to my Facebook pages, because I always create an event for the EMAPP students. You have the pleasure to have Sarah shares with you in March. Okay?
Fantastic. Okay. So let's talk now a little bit about actually positive psychology and coaching, which was on the box to begin with. So, are they good friends? In fact, yes. And why are they good friends? So, in fact, what's happening, I think, sometimes... Okay, we'll get there. Can you please close the door?
5 minutes in Japan are different from 5 minutes.
You're just saying that.
I'm not 5 minutes in Japan is
Say 5, you
5 minutes.
understand 25. 10, you understand 25.
In Japan, they just freak out because it's actually everybody's there quarter to 9 and everybody's fine, and nobody even goes to the toilet for the first quarter of an hour before the language starts. And so it's actually quite frightening. But then the problem is, in Japan, I was explaining, if I don't cover any of the slides that people have in their printouts, that's completely unacceptable. It's completely unacceptable because everything that's there, as a teacher, you have to cover. And people will be really disappointed if they haven't seen what I just meant. Okay, it doesn't matter about this. I cannot skip in Japan. So it's nice to be more flexible. Yes. Well, now I got your attention because of Japan. So positive psychology coaching. Is there such a thing, in fact, positive psychology coaching? That's the question. Is it really separate? There's existential coaching, there is humanistic coaching, there is cognitive behavioral coaching, etc. Is there really such a thing as positive psychology? I'm not sure, because I think there is something that positive psychology can really bring to coaching, and there is this we can talk about positive psychology coaching, but it's fundamentally about this interaction between the two disciplines and how to integrate it into your coaching practice rather than necessarily practicing the positive psychology coaching. So for me, positive psychology coaching and psychology and coaching share this vision, in fact, because in fact they really have something to offer to each other. Both of them already claim that the attention should be redirected from fixing the person towards developing the person. They are already explicit allies in sharing the concern for optimal functioning and well-being and improved performance overall, working with what's right with the person and trying to improve it. And good coaching, in fact, tries to discover the skills and resources of the client already. And that's exactly the premise of positive psychology, is trying to understand the strengths, what's the best about the person, how to take it forward. So in fact, the vision is already there. This shared vision is already there by definition, I would say. But then there are some mutual benefits, I think. And the mutual benefits is that the coaching can benefit from positive psychology because it can give the theoretical and empirical base. So this is working, and this is why this is working. So just to go a little bit deeper and try to explain why something is working. Whilst positive psychology, for positive psychology coaching is a really good actual practical outlet where can we actually test if these ideas are working or not. Are the clients buying these ideas? So this is perfect testing base. That's in fact for all the positive psychology ideas. So for me, for example, how coaches can specifically benefit from positive psychological research is sort of relevant research literature and not just sort of entry-level materials, but more in-depth materials and in-depth complexities, using well-validated measurement tools that can be also very beneficial for coaching, and this sort of intervention or evaluation tools that are free, easy to interpret, and that are not damaging. So we're not measuring depression, we're measuring well-being. Even then, there can be some complexities around it. And provides a basis for evaluating interventions. And there are, of course, some evidence-based interventions. Then, just to add a bit more to the evidence-based interventions, of course, there is one little problem, is that some of the positive psychology evidence-based interventions are sometimes a bit too simplistic or not just somehow not quite as well applicable to coaching. So they're kind of, you don't really go to an executive and start saying, okay, straight away, 3 things that went well. Maybe a bit difficult. So some of these interventions sometimes need to be adapted to actually be more palatable for coaching, especially for executive. Anyway, you're laughing.
Because of the use of the words palatable.
Yes. We'll talk about palatable. Okay. In fact, in coaching, when you look at it, there are already probably existing models. There are some coaching models that are slightly more medical, like behavioral coaching, CBT coaching, multimodal, psychodynamic coaching. They're already by definition a bit more medical models. And of course there are some by definition more positive models, like based on the understanding of change process, specifically appreciative inquiry, for example, evidence-based, solution-based brief therapy as translated to coaching, etc. So again, there are certain models that are already functioning in this positive space. And of course positive psychology coaching just adds to this collection. And the idea of this more positive approach to coaching is not working on questions, what's not working, but what's working well. And this is just some example of this type of coaching questions. What is it? How can we learn from what worked before? What have you been your best experiences at work, for example? What do you think is the core factor that makes your organization tick? What are the positive changes that have occurred I'm shifting to French. that have occurred here since the start of the recession. It's funny, there's no reason. It's in English, I just had the French word. If you had 3 wishes for a company, what would they be? What achievements are you most proud of in your team? Apart from the money, what is it that makes it worthwhile coming to work, etc. So these are some of these approaches to coaching and to coaching questions that are more positive psychology or positive model based. Can you think of any other questions? Shout out.
Strength.
Question. Give me a question. Yes, strength. Give me a question. Shout down some questions. Let's try to think about them. What are the questions? What is the type of positive questions can they ask?
What strengths do you have?
What strengths do you have? Okay.
What makes you feel good?
Sorry? What do you want to accomplish in the future?
What gives you life? Get out of bed in the morning.
What makes you get out of bed in the morning to go to work? Yeah.
What gives you life?
Sorry?
What gives you life?
What gives you life? Okay. Okay. What makes you feel alive?
Yeah.
Okay. What makes you feel alive? Okay.
What kind of dream do you have?
What kind of dreams do you have? What kind of dreams, but dream. What is your dream? Yeah. Okay. How many people here?
What do you want to see when you're 60 years old?
Okay. What do you want to see when you're 60 years old?
Yeah. What put your eyes shining?
Okay. What makes your eyes shine? Lovely. I like this question. Very nice. Any more? We said coaching is about asking questions. So positive psychology coaching for me it's about collecting the questions sometimes. It's also having this big bag, the Santa Claus bag, full of nice questions. Anybody else? I don't. Sorry.
What will be the question that you would like more to answer?
Ah, very nice. So here's some homework. So this is going to appear on the YouTube channel, your own YouTube channel. So you can contribute to the YouTube bit by putting some more positive psychology questions. Okay? Is that a deal?
Yes.
Okay. So, a little problem. I'd like to highlight some little funny problem about positive psychology and applying positive psychology. It applies also to positive psychology in organizations, in coaching, in sort of executive, in the executive world, in education. There is a big problem sometimes in positive psychology. It's the branding of positive psychology. What can be wrong with the branding of positive psychology? Exactly. Positive, yes. It's very easy. I think the problem is positive and another problem is psychology. So psychology, especially when you go to organizations, by definition, sometimes psychology is not very welcome. As long as you name it anything else, that's fine. But if it's leadership, if it's engagement, doesn't matter what, it's great. You can do exactly the same thing. But just putting the word psychology, sometimes you lose half of your clients. Not always, not always. If they are aware, if they went through their own psychotherapy before, for example, etc., they can be very open. Or they had their first degree in psychology, etc. But if not, you just go, for example, to engineers, and you mention psychology, those close. Okay. And whether you add positive or negative to it, doesn't matter. Whatever. It's still psychology. And then positive, it's exactly the same. Yes, it's all about positive. You know what? We have to fire 20% of people, and you are coming here with positive psychology. It's not very positive, it's the reality of life. So that can, and I think as offering positive psychology to the real world, we have to be very aware of the perceptions of this real world that can have. And sometimes perceptions are quite different, so the face validity. What do people hear when they hear positive psychology? What is this face validity? What do they think?
Another religion, another...
It can be another religion, exactly. Sorry? Fluffy, exactly. What do we hear? We can't hear another religion, we can't hear fluffy. What else?
It's the latest.
Marketing, yes, rebranding.
It's the latest trend.
The latest trend, yes, another one. Okay, exactly. So and of course, we are trying to be the latest trend. Okay? So that's an advantage, and yet this disadvantage is that it can be perceived as the latest trend. So the face validity is not necessarily something that has a very big buy-in. It can, under certain circumstances, and under certain other, no. It very much depends on the context. Very, very, very much depends on the context. The science factor. The science factor, again, funnily enough, it can be both the positive and the negative. So the positive is that it is scientifically validated, it is based on real science, it is not self-help. So that's the positive side of the science factor. Have you encountered the negative sides on the science factor?
Too formal.
Somebody can be too formal, yes. Okay. I work a lot with engineers nowadays. Okay, might not match their needs. For example, the perception from engineers is that psychology is not science, full stop. So you telling me this is science? Yeah. And in fact, the perception very often is, I thought the positive, talking to the scientists in a sense, about the science would be a positive factor, and I was wrong. It was actually a negative factor, because their understanding was very much, the sciences are the hard sciences, and everything else, these are not sciences. And in fact, when you're trying to sell it as a science, I don't want to know, because this is not science. So simply put, so all of your premises are wrong because this is not science. So that can be one of the interpretations, and I was quite shocked because I didn't know that. Because I was quite convinced it was science, but again, science interpretations can be quite different.
How do you answer to the question of this question that someone made you last week? Positive psychology does not even be considered as psychology.
Yes, that can be exactly. It can be sometimes not science, and on top of that, it can be not psychology. Of course, because it depends on where the other person is coming from. Because for many psychologists, and there is a war, and there was a war, and we know many of our colleagues who are in war with half of their psychological associations. So, about what the positive psychology is psychology, in addition. Yes, because especially if somebody is coming from much more traditional psychology background, they can be rejecting positive psychology, maybe. Somebody is coming especially from psychoanalytic, psychodynamic background, positive psychology is just this fluffy thing, another self-help, rebranded. It's not psychology, it's not real psychology, it's not depth psychology. So absolutely, it can be rejected as science, and it can also be rejected as psychology. Yeah. We know many examples of this rejection. Another problem is the science factor, and just being aware. And sometimes, by the way, it can work very well. You're just being aware of the perception of the receiver. Another problem with the science factor can be the commonsensical perception of, I don't want this type of science because I'm not a number, and your scientific numbers and your scientific averages, I'm not the average. Your averages are not telling anything about me as a human being. So your averages are meaningless. In fact, it's just about the averages of some sort of other people. I don't want to fit into your averages. I don't want to fit into your box. So the scientific factor can also be perceived as this box fitting that can sometimes be very positive, because people may love like saying, oh yes, I am in this sort of first 25% on this particular measure. It can be very positive perception. It can be a very negative one as well, because this type of quantifying of human beings can also be sometimes perceived as negative, because some people don't want to be quantified or don't want to be associated with being quantified. But that's again, so the science factor is not straightforward. It's not straightforward. And then speak my language. I think that's very important, is that what is the language that you use when you go to your clients? Very much this depends on the client, very much on the client and on the cultural context. So, for example, for an organizational client, for me, for example, I find the words engagement, leadership, resilience, these are the type of words that open doors, for example. What is your experience? What are the words? What is the language for you to bring positive psychology, for example, to an organization?
In terms of client relationship, empathy is becoming more.
More.
So
Okay.
open door.
Yeah.
Client experience.
Thank you.
Like with tools from service design, they require an
Empathy view. Okay. Yes, I found as well, because, for example, one of my clients at the moment, L'Oreal, they're completely going into empathy. Everything is now empathy. So yes, it's a recent trend, especially in the last year. I'm noticing this big shift to empathy. It's one of the door opener words. Yeah.
Empowerment.
Empowerment. Depends where. I think so, because it's interesting. I've seen in many countries empowerment is really one of these words which is a door opener. In England, not anymore. It used to be. Now it's no trend. And yet, for example, in Japan, that was completely the door opener word. So
Why is it an trend in England?
it's being now perceived because the empowerment been now it's a brand word for a while, and it's been overused. So it's no longer a door opener. And many cultures, so if it's a door opener for Portugal, great. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. So and it's very similar trend because it's coming up in many different countries, but no longer in England, for example.
Engagement, I think it's very strong. Because according to the studies, many people are not engaged or
Exactly.
are actively disengaged.
Exactly. Only 14% of the world population, and this is big Gallup studies, that's a very, very good notion to go into this. Absolutely.
Human sustainability
Human sustainability. Nice.
and creativity.
And creativity. Yeah. Thank you. You see, this is about adjusting the language and knowing what language you go with. And then you can say based on positive psychology at some point when it's appropriate. But it depends. For example, in education the words are completely different. They can be completely different. But again, they are different between different countries. So for example, in England, it is now all about well-being and resilience. Now we have all the latest legislation in education, it's all everywhere well-being, resilience. So these are the two notions, and grit. Well-being, resilience, and grit. So there's the three notions that are completely opening all the doors. In France, just to give you an example, you cannot use well-being and resilience. Because well-being is bien-être. Bien-être. En français. Bien-être. What is bien-être? This is bien-être. Okay? Bien-être is this. And that's the association of bien-être. Okay, so bien-être you cannot. Bonheur, c'est ridicule. Bonheur. bonheur, happiness is ridiculous. You could not possibly teach happiness. Still, because France is #1 country on pessimism in Europe. It's a European winner for pessimism. And you teach, and what has been why pessimism? Because optimism is stupid.
It's not realistic.
Sorry? Yes, exactly. It's stupid if you're just, okay, you're crazy. If you want to be optimistic, help yourself. Nobody will talk with you. So optimistic, and why? Because optimism is equated with stupidity in a commonsensical language and commonsensical understanding. And so as happiness is too close to optimism, it's stupid. They are definitely not going to teach something that is stupid. That's what we are working on. It's savoir-être, not bien-être, mais savoir-être. Vivre mieux. Finding all the type of words that I kind of don't have this wall behind in front of you straight away. It's extremely difficult to find the right word to communicate. And resilience, it's completely French phenomenon. You think resilience would be fine, wouldn't it? I mean, in England, resilience is everywhere. Everywhere is resilience, and nobody knows what it is more or less, but everybody's teaching resilience everywhere. But in France now, resilience is associated with one particular individual who actually brought the notion of resilience into the country, called Boris Cyrulnik, who's a nice guy. Who's a nice guy, but he has a subtype of resilience, in fact, because he's a guy who went through the concentration camps, etc., in the Second World War, and he has his own resilience story, in fact, but his resilience story is really post-traumatic growth story, but actually when you dig into it, it's more or less, you are either resilient or not. Great. And if you are either resilient or not, how can you teach resilience? So, in fact, the very dominant representation of resilience in a society contradicts the fact that resilience is a learnable skill. Exactly. So that's a word which is a no-go as well. So this is what I'm trying to get you to think about. It's very much about adapting the language to a particular cultural context and a particular organizational context. So whether it's education, whether it's coaching, etc., whether it's community work, whether it's working with poverty, the language may be different. And very different, and it's not an easy issue, and it's a type of issue that takes actually a lot of thinking, a lot of playing, a lot of testing. Again, another example between French and in English education that I was just stunned about. In England, for example, if you demonstrate that well-being and resilience, basically developing positive education type of skills in children, has an association with academic achievement. Yes! Okay, you have reports and reports now on how this psychosocial competencies actually relate to the academic achievement. And if you can demonstrate that they do relate, and there is some impact, all the doors are wide open. So, logical. So in France, when I first started working in our educational system in France with my first school, I thought that would be a winner or argument, obviously. And this particular school were convinced already that yes, something around well-being, because that was a bilingual school, so there I could use the term well-being. They understood it in English, not in French. So well-being skills, that was potentially an opener for them. They were very interested in developing that in children. So I started talking about the research on well-being skills and well-being competences and academic achievement. And I was in front of the managing board of the school, and I said, don't talk about it. What? Don't talk about it. We are not interested in performance. Everything is already about academic performance. Here we are going away from the academic performance. Linking it with the academic performance is a negative factor. like, yep, our job. Okay? So it is about this adjustment, fine-tuning, and really understanding where your client is coming from and what their needs are.
I love your vision on this because it helps me to understand the positive psychologist as a translator. We have to translate all the time, in every setting, in every culture.
Absolutely. And I think, in fact, the EMAPP programs is actually great for that, because it is, in fact, the EMAPP students are the translators between this world of academics and the world of real life. And in fact, one of the functions to become a good translator and to understand, and again, looking at our back, people who have become successful consultants and really successful in working in positive psychology as a result of EMAPP programs are actually the best translators. For me, it's probably the key to the success in this area, is finding how to communicate between these two worlds. Okay, acknowledging the negative, of course, because if you are having this positive and there are many clients who are actually in distress, feeling disempowered, exhausted, confused, with salaries going down rather than up, with the cost of living going up rather than down, and the rest, positive can be sometimes very tricky. And the second and the final point is also moving from theory to practice. Because, again, it's not just about translating positive psychology in the introduction of it, but it's also about translating positive psychology in terms of the doing of it. Because, in fact, I think if we are really honest, it took me a few years to admit it, now I admit it. The actual psychologists, positive psychologists who bring this positive psychology theory, they think they know how to apply it, but don't be fooled. Most of them don't. They actually, most of people from where the theory is coming, the really, really great theory, have not actually gone out there with companies and actually not necessarily applied it and seen how it works. The majority, not everyone. There are some fantastic exceptions. There are some, and I think we have some of the fantastic exceptions here in this room, but not so many. Actually, not so many. So they're bringing these wonderful theories, and they honestly think, that of course it's completely applied already. And it's not true. And it's very much, again, I think for the EMAPP students instead of being a very unique category, is to take these theories, but also translate them into something that is afterwards workable. So kind of this is your process, to take these abstract theories, and you know psychologists are very good in this abstract theories and concept, and how this concept overlaps with this concept, and is there some shared variance between them, you know, it's great, and it's actually very interesting once you go inside. So, but then, first step, okay, you look at, understand what is the science really saying, okay, about this nice concept, what is actually scientific, not just what the science is really saying, but what, from what the science is really saying, is actually interesting or applicable. What can you do with it, okay? What can you take and how can you take it forward? And then the next step is, okay, so what is this essence of the science saying? And then you translate it into something more concrete. Because it's all great to have nice abstract concepts and lots of different scientific parameters, and then continue arguing what is more scientific, what is less, and what is really going on, which is great. That's the job of psychologists in a sense. And your job afterwards to evaluate this and then make it into something which is much more tangible. Because you don't go into company and offer something. In fact, if you want to offer, you offer something which is much more concrete and much more tangible. And then the next step afterwards is, in fact, like with many human beings, I think if you want this information to stick, you have to make it funky. You have to make it stickable. You have to introduce again the concept that that people, because you know, whatever I'm talking about, you will go away with retaining how much from what I talked about today. 5%? That would be pretty good, in fact, if it's 5%. And most of the time you'll remember what you did yourself, which is why the interactive, engaging type of activities are so important, because you'll remember much more from this type of activities than from any sitting and listening to anybody. And in addition, if we say it in the abstract world, but actually we don't get to something tangible, is afterwards most of this information is going to be not gone, and we are not going to achieve the stickable result. Because again, changing human behavior, it is, I think some of the keys is the information that sticks, something that stays with you, and then the next step, very, very importantly, is information that's practiced, the behavior that actually put into practice and continuously practiced, so this behavior can become a habit. So of course the next, the missing elephant in the room, you know, the black gorilla in the basketball game, is the actual behavior change in terms of how to take this information, even if it's stickable, and actually stick it in the sense, and actually integrate it into the behavior. That's the next difficulty. So at this point, you see, in this philosophical point, I'm probably going to leave you. I'm probably going to leave you to think about it, and then we are going to continue with EMAPP students on some of the activities and exercises, actually sort of taking it a more pragmatic way. And hopefully that was a sufficient teaser for the rest of you to actually come to the next intake of the program. Any questions? Any questions? Any questions? No questions? Everybody wanted this nice reflective space? Okay. Okay, so thank you, and
Well, thank you, Ilona, for a wonderful journey. The teaser is here. Thank you for all of you that decided to join us this morning. It's beautiful outside, and it was beautiful inside.
you mean it's beautiful outside, you can go.
And so, for the ones who are in the EMAPP program, we have the joy of having Ilona for the whole day with us. Keep coming. We'll keep organizing open classes. We have several until the end of the year, academic year. So Sarah says it will be on the 7th of March. And also we invite you to be here on the 20th of March. It's the Happiness Day, Dia da Felicidade. Já não preciso falar a palavra. E vamos lançar aqui às 6 da tarde a plataforma para a felicidade pública, que vai envolver apresentarmos os resultados de 18 debates que vamos ter nas 18 escolas da Universidade de Lisboa sobre felicidade pública. Vamos fazer o World Café com funcionários, docentes, alunos, etc., sobre o que é para eles felicidade pública e como é que cada universidade para a felicidade nacional e internacional. Portanto, fica já o convite, 6 da tarde, dia 20 de março, venham celebrar a felicidade, o Mundial da Felicidade aqui connosco, e ponham logo na agenda, às 9h30 da manhã do dia seguinte, dia 21, temos aqui o professor Ruth Vanoven, sociólogo, enfim, todo de investigação no mundo na área da felicidade. Portanto, é aula aberta às 9h30.
Embora não o homem mais feliz do mundo.
Ficam já com medos para março. Para março, e saber que vai haver muita coisa aqui no ISCSP sobre felicidade, sobre psicologia positiva, uma abordagem crítica, prática. Estejam connosco, está bem? Obrigada.